Please welcome back to the program, Heather McDonald. Heather, thank you so much for taking the time, as always.
Thank you, Larry. I appreciate it.
Heather, have you seen the footage of the black man who's been pinned to the ground by the police officer? 4 of the officers involved in this encounter have been fired. Have you seen the footage, and if so, what's your reaction?
It's appalling. It is one of the most horrifying things I've watched. It's excruciating. It's beyond comprehension. I suspect that Mr. Floyd was heavily resisting arrest beforehand. Nevertheless, that in no way justifies this behavior, and I think it was, in this case, appropriate to not give the officers any due process and remove them.
Well, that was going to be my next question. You're a lawyer. I'm a lawyer. How do you fire them on the spot without having them take any testimony at all? I'm not defending them. I'm just asking about the procedure. And is this not going to spark a countersuit that they were terminated unfairly? I know out here in L.A. there was a killing of a teenager. 4 of the officers were fired summarily. 2 of them were not yet tenured, where they were still trainers, so you can fire them for any reason. But the other 2 had experience, and they countersued, and the judge ruled that they were denied their due process, and they were ordered to be reinstated.
Well, clearly, the mayor of Minneapolis is going by politics, and so and is worried. There were riots last night about the political fallout, and is deferring the legal questions and the struggle with the union to a later point, but feels like right now strong action is necessary. And again, with the media cycle, this was just truly an appalling breach of training and of understanding. Nevertheless, I think, Larry, it's a painful thing to do, to move from the individual to the generalized. What happened to Mr. Floyd simply is not representative of how most black men in this country die, and it's going to be turned into, if we weren't in the coronavirus moment, which is assessing most of the media at this point, it would be turned into another example of systemic racism. And that, if you look at the numbers about police shootings and police shootings of unarmed black men, this is not a shooting, but it was an unarmed man, black man. This is not representative, and it should not be used to discredit the entire law enforcement profession.
Well, there's an editorial, Heather McDonald, in the Chicago Tribune that says the opposite. Quote, "The Minneapolis Police Department is answerable for this heinous incident, but every force in the country, including the Chicago PD, should reflect on why a pattern of excessive force against African Americans and other minorities has not been broken for good," end of quote. Is there a pattern of excessive force against African Americans and other minorities in this country?
No, there's not. Let's look at the numbers, Larry. Last year, there were 41 unarmed individuals who were killed by the police. That's using the Washington Post definition. It's very liberal. If you've grabbed an officer's gun and you're trying to shoot him with it, you count as unarmed. There were within that 41, there were 9 blacks who were allegedly unarmed when killed by the police. Last weekend in Chicago alone, there were 10 people killed in drive-by shootings, all of them black. The 9 that were killed by the police last year, the allegedly unarmed black men, that's out of about 8,000 blacks who are killed each year. So this doesn't even show up. What predicts, and the overwhelming number of police shootings are against armed and resisting and violent suspects, and it is that which predicts police shootings. In fact, a police officer is over 18 times more likely to be killed by a black male than an unarmed black male is to be killed by a police officer. Blacks commit about 42% of all fatal police shootings. They commit about 42% of all murders of cops, even though they're 13% of the population. So Again, it's not a pattern. This is not to say that officers do not need constant retraining in de-escalation, in courtesy, respect, and tactical training. They don't need the damn implicit bias training, which is a complete waste of time, but they are desperate for better tactical training.
Heather McDonald is my guest. Heather, I gave a talk before the Ohio State football team a few years ago at the behest of the then coach Urban Meyer. And he invited me because they had a speaker on who talked about the excessive force, the pattern that was used against cops, and he wanted to have another perspective. So I gave my talk, and at the end of it, I talked about the number of unarmed people who were killed by cops every year. In that particular year, I think there were about maybe 15 or 20 unarmed people killed. And as I recall, there were 3 or 4 more unarmed whites killed than unarmed blacks. And I said, of the unarmed whites, and there was about 100 people in the room, Heather, I said, name one.
Right.
And I put down the mic, and I sat there for 20 seconds. Nobody said a word. Because, as my mom said, when a white person gets killed by the cops, he's just another dead fly.
Mm-hmm. Well, 2019, there were 19 unarmed whites who were killed. And again, 9 blacks. 2015, among the unarmed whites killed was a guy who ran at an officer with a spoon. It was in a domestic violence call in Alabama. If that person had been black, CNN would have been 24 hours a day. There was a white guy who was riding on a bike towards an officer. He had his hand in his pocket, looked like he had a gun. Mm-hmm. He was killed. Mm-hmm. Again, you're absolutely right, Larry. Whether it gets coverage depends on the color of the skin. And ideally, what you want is a white cop, black cop distinction.
Heather McDonald, The Diversity Delusion, How Race and Gender Pandering Corrupt the University and Undermine our culture.